It was only a matter of time before someone got tired of waiting for EA to announce a new Command & Conquer real-time strategy game without canceling it a few months later. And finally, Danish developer Slipgate Ironworks has become the one to take matters into its own hands. Tempest Rising plays like a CNC game with the serial number filed off, and it does a fairly good job of scratching the itch for this style of fast-paced action. It's got two very traditional but well-made campaigns set to the tune of a familiar soundtrack partly written by distinctive CNC composer Frank Klepacki. Given how closely it follows that template though, it's a little disappointing that it didn't have more fun building personality and atmosphere between missions.
The harebrained mission had been accomplished.
Heads up, in this review I'm specifically covering the single-player campaigns of Tempest Rising. For thoughts on multiplayer, check out IGN.com after launch.
Too easy.
So, how closely does Tempest Rising follow CNC's lead exactly?
Deal with this.
Sure, it replicates the plate-spinning gameplay where you build a base, harvest resources, and crank out infantry, tanks, and aircraft that die in seconds if you're not paying close attention when they encounter the enemy. But a lot of games have done that over the 3 decades since CNC came out.
Ready and waiting.
But here, you could just as easily change a few names and Tempest Rising would be fairly indistinguishable from a CNC iteration. That's not Tiberium or harvesting, it's Tempest. That's not a GDI Mammoth tank, it's a GDF Trebuchet. That building shaped like hands isn't a Nod barracks, that's a Dynasty barracks. That's not a mobile construction vehicle deploying into your construction yard, that's a... actually no, that's straight up what they call it. So yes, it is pretty close.
Primary objective accomplished.
The campaign story is treated in much the same lovingly derivative sort of way, reframing the conflict as between the good guy Global Defense Initiative, Global Defense Force, and the vaguely evil paramilitary dynasty factions fighting for territory in Europe and Northern Africa. Here it's all set in the aftermath of a Cuban Missile Crisis where things went much worse than they did for us, but you wouldn't really know it's a post-nuclear war world. Other than some wrecked roads on the battlefields, the regional maps look pretty normal, and none of the missions take place anywhere recognizable. But more importantly, it's missing a few of CNC's secret ingredients, such as a good villain. So much of the personality of the classic CNC games came from Nod and its mysteriously ageless leader Kane.
Oh, and congratulations on your promotion.
Granted, Dynasty bosses have more character than the generic gruff-voiced colonel of the GDF, but this guy can't hold a candle to Kane's wild-eye goatee twirling.
The world is at my fingertips.
You can't form a cult of personality around a grumpy guy in a beret. So beyond being black leather fetishists, Dynasty doesn't really have a lot going on ideologically. They're not even explicitly framed as fascist bad guys out for global domination, especially compared to the other side with the shadowy council pulling the GDF strings.
Yeah, it's not ideal.
So we don't even get any good evil moments like attacking the Pentagon or the Eiffel Tower. Without something like that to get invested in, I wasn't super motivated to sit through all this optional dialogue to get more background on the relatively bland lore, especially with this voice acting.
I'm not at liberty to speculate on sensitive topics. I'm sure you understand.
In a day and age when anyone with a smartphone can replace their Zoom background with a high-tech command center or a dark, ominous paramilitary headquarters, I'm sad Slipgate wasn't granted the resources to do CNC-style live-action cutscenes and get someone to follow in Tim Curry's legendary footsteps by chewing the virtual scenery to pieces.
Yes, General. It is a trap.
These animated characters just can't compete, especially when there was clearly no budget to match mouth movements to dialogue on most of them.
He's not one to show it, but it sounds like you've impressed him.
When it comes to the actual real-time strategy gameplay though, Tempest Rising fares much better. It may be playing within the constraints of a very defined genre and style, but it looks nice, runs well, its interface is modern and friendly, and it's pretty good at finding ways to be inventive with its faction design. Once you get past basic infantry, just about everything has a special ability or twist to it that you'll want to spend some time learning to use and deciding if it's worth spending your time to micromanage, as opposed to selecting everything and sending it into the attack move meat grinder.
Out of the way.
There are too many to list, but the GDF's heavy use of drone control units is a fun one. You can move them independently to scout within a radius, and if they're destroyed, they simply respawn for free in a few seconds. And having to generate resources for special abilities by taking an extra step like marking a target before destroying it is a nice touch to reward you for a bit of extra micromanagement in a small engagement. I also love how GDF poses and then answers the question of what would happen if GDI's Mammoth tank and StarCraft 2's Siege tank loved each other very much. Which is some excellent wish fulfillment for fans of both those series. These trebuchet hybrids deploy and undeploy really quickly, which drives home how micromanagement heavy Tempest Rising is built to be. You don't need to constantly flip back and forth between mobile and stationary modes, but you'll get more firepower out of them if you do. On the other side, the Dynasty's scrap truck is a wildly powerful unit that automatically repairs every vehicle or building in a radius while it's stationary, and it can deploy to become a turret structure with an even bigger repair range. You can then use that to expand your base building area and stock it with flame and missile turrets, so you can very quickly create a vehicle repair outpost with self-healing defenses right on the enemy's doorstep. That, combined with their ultra-long-range Porcupine missile trucks and deadly SAM launchers to fend off air attacks, makes Dynasty a fantastic offensive turtling faction. And when you want to get a bit more aggressive, they can literally roll out a giant metal ball that flattens any tanks or infantry in its path if they can't destroy it first. All in all, the variety of missions once you get past the first few tutorials is respectable but expected. There's a lot of base cracking, defense holdouts and last stands, and commando missions where you're playing with a limited number of units led by one powerful specialist, and just about all of them come with optional objectives for you to cross off that might encourage replays. It's interesting that some of them don't even pop up unless you scout out the whole map, though if you're trying to do everything in one go, that might be a bit of a troll. It's all well done, but again, it's very conventional. There's nothing here that thinks radically outside the box or effectively builds minigame modes around unit abilities the way StarCraft 2 did 15 years ago. They are a good time to smash through, but very few stand out.
Primary objective accomplished.
Like nearly every RTS campaign ever made, Tempest Rising gradually gives you access to new units and airstrike support abilities as you go. But here you also choose to unlock new global upgrades every mission from one of 3 linear trees, plus you can unlock and then mix and match upgrades to fill an expanding number of slots. Some of these are minor but useful, such as adding burn damage over time to Dynasty's flamethrowers or stat bonuses that start units out with a veterancy level. Some feel a little bit exploitive, like the one that increases infantry vision range by 50%, which makes them incredibly effective spotters for artillery. A few, though, are meaningful choices that I'd definitely think hard about if I were to play through again on a higher difficulty. The biggest of these for me was the Stolen Plans abilities that let you build some of the opposing faction's vehicles without having to capture any buildings. Some of those are game changers that help me break through defensive lines quickly. It's true that leaning on these can homogenize campaigns a bit rather than emphasizing what makes each faction unique, but I appreciate being able to customize my force. Oh, also, the ability to repack the scrap truck after deploying it was a huge upgrade that saved me from having to build a fleet of them. So it's not spoiling anything that isn't on the Steam page to say that late in both campaigns, the story abruptly introduces a third technologically advanced faction tied to the glowing resource you're all fighting over, which is a sentence I could have copied directly from the Wikipedia page of Command & Conquer 3.
I want to know what the hell we're dealing with.
The alien-ish Veti don't have a playable campaign, and they're not available in skirmish or multiplayer yet, so it's hard to suss out exactly how they work. But it's good that they're here for variety's sake. Fighting their heavier armies isn't dramatically different from taking on the GDF or Dynasty in the campaigns, because they have similar base defense structures, tanks, aircraft, and infantry. But they do have a few terrifying late-game units that GDF and Dynasty can't go toe-to-toe with, and those required me to take an entirely different posture when one showed up. Tempest Rising's 2 good-sized single-player campaigns are a large helping of comfort food for RTS fans old enough to remember Command & Conquer in its heyday, and a way for everyone else to sample a classic style we don't see very often anymore without having to deal with any creaky old technology. Its nature as an homage to those games does mean it's not terribly ambitious when it comes to doing anything bold you won't have seen before, but it does put its own interesting spin on faction design that kept me experimenting with abilities throughout the campaigns and prevented it from feeling like too much of a retread. The main place these campaigns disappointed a CNC fan like myself was in its straight-faced mission briefings that just can't compare to the B-movie goofiness and memorable characters of the games that inspired it.
We have created time machine.
Thanks for watching, and remember to check IGN.com for my thoughts on multiplayer after that launches. And stick around to hear a little bit more about why I wanted to review Tempest Rising and get to know my taste in RTS games.
Tom Marks, Executive Reviews Editor, here with Dan Stapleton, our Director of Reviews and reviewer of Tempest Rising. You've reviewed a bunch of RTSs for us, most recently Empire of Ants, Homeworld 3, but why did you what drew you to this one specifically?
Well, this game is very much an homage to old school Command & Conquer, which, and you know, the polite way of describing my age is old school. Command & Conquer was very much a formative experience for me. One of my fondest early gaming memories was bringing home, or PC gaming memories, I should say, was bringing home the Command & Conquer CDs that I had split the purchase with my friends. I got the GDI disc, he got the Nod disc, and then we would trade them back and forth. And yeah, those games all have a special place in my heart, even though I'm now kind of too old and slow to play multiplayer in any meaningful way.
On that note, let's talk about kind of your RTS tastes in general. We do this thing in our written reviews on IGN.com called a playlist, where we'll have our reviewers sort of break down a top 10 or whatever list of their tastes in a genre or a series. You did a playlist for this one of just your favorite RTSs, so we can get a sense of what you really like, what you look for in those.
This is very, very much a nostalgic playlist for me. Some of these games, hold up better than others if you were to go back and play them today. But they're some of my fondest RTS memories. And the first one I put on this list was Command and Conquer. Not Command and Conquer, Company of Heroes, which I think is probably the highest score ever given to an RTS. I was back at PC Gamer when I reviewed that, but I gave it a 96. But that was a really interesting, new for the time take on RTS. Really detailed game, really tactical, more than big picture strategic. And I kind of kept with my Relic entertainment theme here with Dawn of War 2 Retribution. And these games have really good campaigns is one thing I really like about them. I'm more of a single player RTS guy than multiplayer, but a really good campaign. This one had a fantastic twist at the end of it. Then Homeworld is one of the classic RTS campaigns. Absolutely gorgeous game all the way around, and I'm a big sci-fi space guy. Leading into the next one, which is Sins of the Solar Empire Rebellion, which doesn't have a campaign, but you play against the computer a bunch, because I don't know about you guys, but I don't have like a ton of friends who are going to sit with me and play for like 8 hours or however long it takes to play a big space campaign. And then like the Blizzard classics, StarCraft 2, Warcraft 3. I think StarCraft 2, like the campaign is just so well done. Just the way they think outside the box and recontextualize a bunch of units and give you a bunch of optional objectives that I wish Tempest Rising had taken a little bit more inspiration from that, just because it's more straightforward. Supreme Commander Forged Alliance, going more on the big picture strategic than tactical angle, but that I think is the best version of Supreme Commander. Just being able to zoom way out and just see the whole battlefield and zoom in and see individual units blowing each other up is really a fantastic experience. Age of Empires 2, a classic. I mean, that one dominated my college LAN years. Lots of fun had with that one. World in Conflict, which was another really strong campaign that was done by Massive Entertainment, which did Tom Clancy's The Division and then Star Wars Outlaws. They haven't gone back to RTSs. I wish they would. And then finally, just to make sure I got a Command and Conquer on here, Red Alert 3, which, I mean, you can't get a better like over the top campaign than that one.
Using a revolutionary yet untested new time travel technology, 3 glorious Soviet patriots journeyed into the past to eliminate the greatest scientific mind of the 20th century.
They got Tim Curry in there to just go absolutely crazy with those live action cutscenes.
And while you are mopping up the last of those capitalist pigs, I will root out the enemy within.
Which is another thing that I really wish Tempest Rising had done, was like just get somebody like that, not obviously not Tim Curry himself, but somebody like that just to go crazy with these cutscenes, because they're a little bit dry.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
Something you mentioned going through this, a theme of this was the single player. The campaign is really important to you, which I think is true for a lot of people. Not everyone is looking to grind a ranked ladder, when some people just want that single player experience, and vice versa. But this review specifically is the single player review, the campaign review for Tempest Rising. And we do this sometimes for certain games. We do it for Call of Duty. We usually do it for RTSs, of splitting up the single player and the multiplayer. Can you talk a little bit about like why we did that? And then also sort of if you have any thoughts on the multiplayer here.
Yeah, and the basic idea is it always frustrated me to have to assign like one review score to both a single player and multiplayer game, and even though they come in the same box, you can't buy them separately. That's a fair counterpoint, but at the same time, there's a Venn diagram of players, right? It's the single player people like myself that are mostly in it for the campaign, and then there's the multiplayer people who are mostly in it for the multiplayer, and that's they may or may not ever touch the campaign. And there's people that play both. I dabble in multiplayer, but I'm mostly the single player fan. But like there are some games where the single player campaign is just awful. It's just like a tutorial and little more than that. And there are games like this one where the multiplayer seems very bare bones. I'm gonna do a write up on the site about it later after it goes live, and we can play against actual people. But there's only like a couple of you go into the multiplayer settings and there's just a couple of options, and there are a handful of maps, 2 and 4 player. Not everyone can be Blizzard and throw, the kitchen sink at both sides of that equation. And, not every game has to be everything to everybody.
Well, Dan, thank you very much for chatting with us a little bit more about the review, this game, your tastes in the genre, all of that sort of stuff. It's great to dig into that. And if you want more reviews, you can check out Dan's previous RTS reviews, stuff like Empire Advance or Homeworld 3. You can also check out more recent reviews like Schedule 1 and Commando's Origins. For everything else, stick with IGN.